Mark tells us a story about Jesus, and he's always on the run, immediately moving from one thing to the next. Unlike the other Gospels, Mark is sparing when it comes to the moments when Jesus is just teaching, but teach he does in chapter 4. Jesus also said, "With what shall we compare the kingdom of God? Or what parable will we use for it? It is like a mustard seed, which when sown upon the ground is the smallest of all the seeds on earth. Yet when it is sown, it grows up and becomes the greatest of all shrubs, and puts forth large branches, so that the birds of the air can make nests in its shade." Jesus begins with a question of sorts. How do I describe the kingdom of God? Well, Jesus says, you take an itty-bitty mustard seed and you plant it in the ground and give it some time and it'll germinate and it will send out its shoots and its roots, and eventually it grows into a glorious shrubbery. Really, Jesus, the kingdom of God is like shrubbery. Yeah, man, that baby might grow 3, 4, 5, maybe even 6 feet tall. Wow, Jesus, that's one impressive shrubbery. Now, what Jesus is doing here is he's tapping into an old prophecy from the book of Ezekiel. It's a prophecy about the fall of the great Assyrian Empire. "Consider Assyria, a cedar of Lebanon, with fair branches and forest shade and of great height, its top among the clouds. The waters nourished it, the deep made it grow tall. So it towered high above all the trees of the field. All the birds of the air made their nests in its boughs." Sounds an awful lot like Jesus' parable, except, well, instead of a tall and mighty tree, Jesus likens God's kingdom to a lowly shrub. It's really quite an absurd image, so absurd that Matthew and Luke could not leave it alone. Luke turns that shrub into a tree. The mustard seed grows into a tall and mighty tree. Matthew splits the difference and says the seed becomes the greatest of shrubs and then grows into a tree. But in Mark, it's just a plain old shrub. Now understand that Jesus is having a go with us. He's pulling our leg with this parable. Sometimes that's what parables do. They use humor to help us hear something that we might not otherwise want to hear. That the kingdom of God is indeed not a mighty, mighty tree imposing its will from above. It's not an empire, but rather a lowly ground cover. Now, Brian Blunt is a scholar who studies the Gospel of Mark. He's going to be with us in a few weeks, preaching and teaching on the Gospel. But Brian suggests that much of the Gospel of Mark is written as a warning against the zealots who were active in the time of Jesus. Now, the zealots were not exactly on the same page as Jesus, so, well, how shall I describe the zealots?
Who is this weak Messiah guy with the story of tiny seedlings? Always talking about the kingdom, but he never is a man of action. No, I don't want to hear your parable. No, don't you see we're wasting time? No, I don't want to follow your way. No, you just need to follow mine. So no, I don't want no shrub. Shrub is a kingdom, can't get no love from me. I'm bringing back King David's line and Israel's pride. Just you wait and see. I don't want no shrub. Shrub is a kingdom, can't get no love from me. I'm bringing back King David's line and Israel's pride. Just you wait and see.
Jesus sees the zealots plotting their rise to power, and he tells them this story as a counterexample to suggest that power doesn't come from above, but rather from below. It's not a tree, but rather a shrub. Not just any shrub, but really an obnoxious mustard plant. There's this ancient historian named Pliny, and he talked about mustard as if it were a weed. It grows entirely wild, he wrote, and it's scarcely possible to get rid of it. In the Roman Empire, there were actually laws against planting mustard plants. It was so hard to get rid of. So in essence, Jesus likens the kingdom of God to kudzu. Kudzu was planted throughout the southeastern United States between 1935 and 1950, of course, to combat erosion. The government gave out 85 million seedlings of it. By 1953, the USDA removed kudzu from the list of acceptable ground covers, and by 1970, kudzu was labeled a pest weed, and then in the 90s, it was added to the Federal Obnoxious Weed List. Did you know that such a thing even existed? Oh, who am I kidding? I'm surrounded by federal employees here. One of you probably actually wrote the list. But if you've ever driven throughout the rural southeast, you'll understand why it was labeled an obnoxious weed. Kudzu swallows forests whole. If unchecked, it'll cover over houses and thick tangles of growth. And nationwide, kudzu will consume 150,000 acres every year. Try as you might, once it is planted, you cannot get rid of it. And so it is with the kingdom of God. It spreads, it takes over, it covers over our every ambition of being that tall and mighty tree in the forest. It shows us that true power is not being that tall and mighty tree, but in being the invasive love of God that you just cannot get rid of. So friends, let it grow 4, 5, maybe even 6 feet tall. Kind of like the snow outside.
Snow.
4 feet high and rising. How high is
Snow.
Papa? She said it's 4 feet high and rising. Hey, come look through the window pane. The bus is coming, gonna take us to the train. Looks like we'll be blessed with a little more
Snow.
4 feet high and rising.